Just like that, 3 days of preseason testing are over, and next week, we are starting the 2024 season. Before we get into that, however, here are my predictions of how all 10 teams roughly stack up relative to one another, and where I think each team will be going into the first 2 or 3 races before the in-season development game really kicks off. I don't think it's a huge surprise to see Haas ranked as the lowest team heading into Bahrain. Even before preseason began, new team principal Ayu Komatsu basically admitted that due to how late they developed into last year and therefore started work on the 24 car, most likely they would be at the back of the grid to start the season. Haas did more laps than any other team with 441, and whilst that is a huge positive for their reliability, it's more so to do with their biggest weakness from the past few seasons, which has been their atrocious tyre wear. Hulk and K-Mag focus mostly on long runs to try to collect data and gauge if they've improved their tyre wear, which hopefully the team has got more on top of. In terms of the car itself, whilst it wasn't unstable or throwing the drivers into the barrier, the fact is that it clearly doesn't have as much downforce as the other cars and therefore as much grip, which I think will be the team's biggest development focus to start the season. For 2024, Williams have a completely brand new concept of car that was only unveiled the day before preseason testing began. This was because Williams pushed the development of the car right to the last possible second, and because the car was so new, it explains why the team had more reliability issues than any other team and in the end completed the least number of laps. Albon described the car as having a completely different driving characteristic to last year's car, and that whilst they were stronger in slow and medium speed corners, it has come at the cost of straight line speed. There's no doubt that the car looked tricky to drive. Logan had a big spin and both drivers had numerous off-track excursions as the car seemed very sensitive to wind changes. Speaking about just how different the new car feels, Alex actually used a really great analogy by saying that within a team there are fundamental car traits that carry over even across regulation changes. McLaren is a great recent example of this when Ricciardo actually struggled to adapt to their strange cars. Alex said that usually the only time when you'll stop experiencing these specific traits is when you move to a different team, and that the FW46 basically feels like a car that was made by a completely different team. Even though Sauber finished with the second fastest time thanks to Zhou's very late lap on the final day, I want to draw your attention to the results from the last day of preseason testing in 2023, where look who is that in third, it is Sauber again. So yeah, Sauber, I am familiar with your game. It also must be said that even though Pirelli allowed the teams to bring any tyre they wanted from the Pirelli range, for the Bahrain Grand Prix, the C3 tyre will actually be the softest possible compound, and so that is why teams like Alpine didn't even bother to bring any C4 or C5 tyres, as they are not race representative. Sauber clearly like a glory run, and even though the drivers underlined that the new car is an improvement, both Zhou and Bottas also admitted in interviews that more work needs to be done and already hinted towards upgrades coming at the beginning of the season, which is a slight indication that they're not as happy as they'd like to be about the initial performance. Alpine will definitely be a team starting on the back foot from what we've seen. For 2024, they have also brought a brand new concept, and that is why they didn't really focus too much on quali runs and more so on long runs and lots of aero simulations to see if their new concept correlates with what they saw in the wind tunnel. People watching the car on track described it as inconsistent because going through the same corner during a stint, the car seemed to do different things on different laps, which obviously doesn't fill the driver with a lot of confidence. It's unsurprising then that whilst the drivers are trying to remain upbeat, I thought Esteban Ocon gave the most honest account by saying, "It's a new concept, you know, this car. We have a lot to learn, which we did over the first 3 days, but we still have a lot to improve. And we need to get that car quicker and quicker the more laps we do." It's very rare that you'll get an Aston Martin 2023 type situation where a team just launches up the pecking order. RB is not that, but it did seem throughout the 3 days that with Williams getting off to a slow start, Sauber not exactly happy with where they are, and Alpine struggling as well, I think with the small gains that RB have made and the consistency that they showed throughout the 3 days on long runs, quali laps, and with their reliability, I think at the moment they could be leading that Alpine Williams pack to start the season. The drivers massively played down expectations, which isn't exactly a surprise. And even though Alpine might be faster than RB when it actually matters, it's difficult to give Alpine more credit over RB at the moment for pace that they haven't actually shown. To be honest, Aston Martin are a very tricky team to place right now because overall, they had a very quiet test and flew mostly under the radar compared to making all of the headlines 12 months ago. This pack right at the front of the midfield that are all going to be fighting for podiums is so difficult to call, but Fernando confirmed that the car is definitely a good evolution and has more performance than last year, with a very strong long run pace, especially from Fernando. On track, the car definitely impressed the people that were watching, with the consensus being that it's a very stable, very balanced car right out of the box. Listening to comments made by the drivers and technical director James Allison, the number one thing that the team wanted to get on top of after last year, which was eliminating some of the bad driving traits like the constant rear instability, has been achieved with the W15. There's no doubt that the team was experimenting a lot with suspension changes because at points, the car was bouncing and visibly sparking way more than any other car, which indicates that they were trying to run it extremely low. Both Lewis and George confirmed that the car is definitely easier to drive and much more stable compared to last year, which now gives the team a much better platform to develop on. I'm still not sure if the car has the ultimate edge of pace compared to the absolute best, because even when Russell was clearly trying to do some low fuel performance runs, he needed like 3 new sets of the C3 tyre to even get within a tenth of Verstappen's time on the same tyre. Obviously we don't know fuel loads, but it just didn't look as easy as perhaps it should have and does with the other teams. And now I will admit, me putting McLaren third might seem like a little bit high given that by the team's own admission, testing wasn't exactly smooth sailing. Reliability was definitely a concern with multiple issues, hence their low mileage, and Oscar Piastri's race simulation that he did on the final day wasn't as impressive as the team I'm going to talk about in a bit, with tyre degradation looking quite severe. Although it's difficult to gauge how much of that was the car, and how much of that was Oscar and his inexperience, especially on such a high deg circuit. However, despite these issues, I still think that, especially in the hands of Lando, the McLaren, when it actually worked, showed some really impressive pace, and it just gives me this strange hope that once they get everything together, this will be a very strong package right from the start of the season. Over 1 lap on the relevant C3 tyre, which will be the softest tyre in Bahrain, McLaren had the second fastest time only behind Red Bull, and balance-wise, the car also looked consistently stable and like it gave the drivers a lot of confidence when they tried to push. When it comes to Ferrari, it's the hope that kills you every single season. And whilst I'm not going to say that they looked better than the team that shall not be named, that's coming up very soon, I am fairly comfortable in saying that at the moment, they do look like best of the rest. Across the board, the team just ticked so many boxes. Reliability was very good with them doing the second most laps. Sainz at the end of day 2 did a really eye-catching race simulation, which indicates that they have made a big improvement on their tyre wear and race pace. Both drivers also had a lot of positive things to say, with Leclerc confirming that the car is a lot more drivable and also that the team is in a much better place than they were this time last year. And in terms of the lap times, not only was Ferrari consistently up there on every single tyre, but what impressed me most is that both Leclerc and Sainz were always very close to each other in terms of the times that they set, which to me indicates a car that is very consistent and one that both drivers are able to get a good amount of performance out of. Ferrari looked good, but they still weren't Red Bull. Any fears about Red Bull potentially heading down the wrong route with their brand new concept were quickly squashed during the first day, and overall, every single team and every single driver pretty much pointed out that Max and Red Bull are clearly still the team to beat. And now obviously their pace was great, their car looked great, Checo also seemed to hit the ground running despite some reliability issues on his side setting the team's fastest time. But the one word that I'd use to describe especially Max watching him drive the RB20 was effortless. When he jumped in the car on the last day, within 20 minutes he was setting purple sectors, and he actually did the fastest time, which was just a tenth slower than Checo, on a used set of the C3 tyres. When Max wanted to push the car, it looked super stable, very compliant, and his race simulations confirmed that this car with Max at the wheel will remain the class of the field to start the season. Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe. That would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.